Man, this game was the very definition of it's fine, I guess. All they had to do was improve upon the core mechanics and level design of the first game while removing the bullshit, but instead we get a hodgepodge of some of the most played out design choices in AAA games. A lot of this game's problems stem from the open world. The way it's laid out is super fucking awkward. The city's segmented into 4 different chunks with this big transit building in the middle. The only way to get to each segment is by going through this building, which means you're constantly going to be funneled into running the same routes almost every time. I thought it was the runner's vision that was making me run the same route, but it turns out there's only like 2 routes to run. I thought it was very hand-holdy that this game had this on all the time, since the first game organically led the player by just highlighting objects in red. This game still does that, but you need the runner's vision on top of that, since this game is filled with dead ends that you'll constantly run into without it. Everything looks the goddamn same, and since there's not many routes to run in the first place, there's not much incentive to deviate from the same path. Not that you would want to, since this game is filled with nonsensical fluff, collectibles that don't really do anything, optional missions that are all time trials, these stupid social features that just clutter the map. It's all just really bland. The world doesn't evolve in any meaningful way, and backtracking through the same areas gets repetitive fast. Fast travel became my best friend pretty quickly when I noticed that getting to missions took longer than the missions themselves. Also, maybe this is just a personal preference, but I really don't like the feel of this game. There's a fair amount of people that say that this game is more fluid than the first, and I strongly disagree. It's more floaty, I'll give you that. Instead of running in an arc while running on walls, Faith just snaps onto them unnaturally now. Speed isn't something you have to worry about anymore, since Faith just hauls ass automatically, but now there's a noticeable lack of weight with all of these maneuvers now. Not to mention, the challenge of the parkour is gone now, since you don't have to worry about building momentum. You're essentially just running forward and pressing spacebar every now and then. Also, did Faith skip leg day? Because you have to roll even after the tiniest falls now. This is the part where someone that played this game will probably interject, but Josh, what about the gadgets like the electronic disruptor and the grappling hook? Ah yes, the grappling hook, where you have to slow down or stop in your tracks full stop in order to use it. What a great addition. The only improved move from the first game is the springboard, where you could just hold it down instead of tapping it like a madman. You can also spring from everywhere now, which is nice. What's not nice is all the other moves from the first game not being available from the start. Yeah, this skill roll, coiling up your legs, the 180 wall run, all locked behind a skill tree. Why? Because every fucking AAA game needs to have a skill tree apparently. This is one of the most arbitrary ones I've ever seen. Really? I have to gain experience in order to learn how to roll and lift my legs up? It doesn't even make sense within this game's world. It's heavily implied that Faith is one of the best runners in the city, so how would she not know all these basic moves? As a result of this, the beginning of the game feels like shit. A lot of the side missions are introduced to you early, but most of them shouldn't be attempted until you upgrade your movement later, since they give you practically no time. The combat's another aspect that people say is improved in this game, and I'm not so sure about that. It's improved in some ways. Having separate button presses for quick and heavy attacks is welcome. The new shift ability that you use to avoid attacks also adds some actual skill to these fights. Makes no sense how Faith is immune to bullets, but whatever, I'll roll with it. Kicking dudes off ledges never ceased to amuse me, and you can actually hit dudes out the way while you're on the run, which is low-key the best improvement. It complements the parkour side of things since you still maintain pace. It's too bad that most combat encounters aren't like this. DICE insists on locking you in areas where you have to take these guys out. Though the combat has improved, it's still nothing that I would call good, and just like the first game, it becomes more annoying than fun. With the first game, the annoyance was with these forced gunfights that felt like shit. You could no longer grab guns and quickly shoot down enemies, which sounds like an improvement until you realize how dragged out most of these fights are. There's a lot of these asshole cop guys, and most of them will constantly counter any frontal assault, which means that you're going to be abusing the same tactic of getting behind them and literally kicking their ass. Take into account that some of these dudes have sizable health bars, and you could imagine that this gets repetitive fast. The only thing I looked forward to when it came to these was the flashy finish. Obviously, this game looks really good graphically, but I can't say I'm a fan of the art style this time around. This really comes down to personal preference, but I think the minimalist style of the first game looks better. Hard to improve upon that without fucking it up since, you know, the whole point of minimalism is to keep it minimal. They tried by upping the futurism with flying cars and billboards, and it just doesn't work. Well, at least for me it doesn't. I don't know, man, there was a dreamlike beauty to how simple and white the first game was. It still looks nice, and there's no other game that's done that same look since. The City of Glass in this game, to me, just looks like another cyberpunk city but with white buildings. Well, at least this game isn't so bright that it melts my eyes off. And hey, you can actually adjust the FOV to something tolerable. I guess there were some improvements. Solarfield's music is still pretty good, though not as good as the first game. No track here comes close to how good the intro song in that game was. And overall, I don't think that there was enough variety. Way too many ambient tracks and not enough IDM. It's soothing, but I would be lying if I said that I remembered any song. And speaking of not remembering, this story, man, what a fucking snooze fest that was. Not to say that the narrative of the first Mirror's Edge was all that interesting, but it did have some personality. This game is every rebellious group fights evil corporation story ever told. All the boxes are checked off. Ragtag group of rebels? Yep. Quirky tech person that's a god at hacking? Yes sir. Cartoonishly evil CEO? Why not? Of course tropes aren't bad on their own, but they've done nothing interesting with these. There's a lot more characters this time around, and let me tell you, man, none of them are interesting in the slightest. Man, even Faith isn't safe. They turned her into this bratty, spineless centrist that just does things for people just because. There's barely any motivations behind her actions, which is a far cry from the Faith of the first game that hated the system and needed to save her sister from imprisonment. It's a shame too, since her new design is super dope. Shame that there's not a personality behind it. Probably the worst thing about the narrative though is the ending. There's zero closure. The game just ends. For those that haven't played this game, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that nothing gets accomplished. The game even tells you.
I wish I could say everything changed. That the employees rose up in disgust over reflection and overthrew the conglomerate. But there was no mass uprising. No riots on the streets. Krugersek remained in control. Life went on as before.
Then what the fuck was this all for? The worst part about it is that you know they tried. There's no way they would apply cutscenes this good looking for a story that wasn't supposed to be paid attention to. Or maybe the writers had different goals from the cinematic artists. Who knows? All I know is that I do not care for this game in the slightest. Unlike the first Mirror's Edge, which was a breath of fresh air when it came out, Catalyst is like one of those black shirt dudes in the Kendrick Humble video. Just another bland open world game in a market of bland open world games. Not a disaster or even that bad, just really bland. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this one. Help this video out in the algorithm by doing the usual stuff, and until next time.